The fluorescent lights flickered in Block C of Huntsville State Prison, casting shadows that danced across the concrete walls like restless spirits. Officer Rebecca Martinez adjusted her utility belt and began her evening rounds. The familiar weight of her pepper spray and radio, a small comfort in this place, where comfort was a rare commodity. She'd been working here for 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the place, the sounds that mattered and the ones that didn't. The clang of metal doors, the shuffle of feet, the occasional shout that meant nothing or everything depending on the tone. Tonight felt different, though. The air seemed heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the heat, the way it pressed down even after sunset, making everyone irritable and restless. Or maybe it was something else, something her instincts were trying to tell her, but her rational mind refused to acknowledge. She passed cell after cell, her boots echoing against the polished concrete floor. Most inmates were settling in for the night, lying on their bunks or reading under the dim cell lights, but a few watched her with unusual intensity, their eyes following her movements in a way that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Rebecca had learned to trust her instincts in this place. They'd saved her life more than once. Webb watched from his cell as Officer Martinez approached his section. His hands gripped the bars, knuckles white with tension. He'd seen what the others hadn't noticed, caught the whispered conversation near the laundry room earlier that afternoon, spotted the makeshift weapon being passed between hands in the chow line. His heart pounded as he calculated the distance, the timing. She was maybe 40 feet away now, 30 seconds before she walked into a trap that would end her life, and probably his too. He'd spent 8 years in this place, keeping his head down, following the rules, trying to be the kind of man his daughter could be proud of when he finally got out. But right now, all of that was about to go up in smoke because he couldn't just stand here and watch an innocent woman die, even if that woman wore a uniform, even if saving her meant throwing away everything he'd worked for. Rebecca reached for her radio to check in with the control room. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Her finger was an inch from the button when everything changed. A hand clamped over Rebecca's mouth from behind, and a strong arm pulled her backward into the shadows between 2 cell blocks. The movement was so fast, so unexpected, that her training barely had time to kick in. Terror shot through her veins like ice water. This was it. This was how officers died in places like this. Ambushed during routine rounds, their bodies found hours later, their families left with nothing but questions and grief. She tried to scream, but the hand over her mouth was like iron. She tried to fight, driving her elbow backward, but the arm around her waist was immovable. Her fingers scrambled for her pepper spray, but before she could reach it, a voice spoke directly into her ear. "Don't move, don't make a sound." The voice was urgent, almost desperate, but not threatening, not the voice of someone planning violence. "You're about to walk into something bad, officer, real bad. I'm trying to save your life here, so please just listen to me for 30 seconds. Rebecca's training kicked in properly now. She stopped struggling, her mind racing through protocols, calculating her chances, assessing the situation. The hand over her mouth loosened slightly, just enough for her to breathe normally. She could feel her attacker's heart pounding against her back, could hear the fear in his breathing. This wasn't the calm, controlled assault of a predator. This was panic. This was desperation. "I'm going to move my hand," the voice continued, "but you need to stay quiet. Can you do that? Nod if you understand." She managed a small nod, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. When the hand pulled away from her mouth, she spun around immediately, her hand finally reaching her pepper spray. Webb stood before her, hands raised in surrender, palms out. Inmate 847392. She knew his file by heart like she knew all the files of inmates in her section. Webb, 34 years old, armed robbery, 8 years into a 15-year sentence. Model prisoner, never caused trouble, worked in the library, took every rehabilitation class offered. Until now. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rebecca hissed, her voice low but filled with fury. Her finger was on the trigger of her pepper spray, ready to blind him if he made one wrong move. Marcus kept his hands raised, his dark eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her pause. There was no malice there, no violence, just fear, pure, genuine fear. "Saving your life," Marcus said simply, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "There are 3 men waiting for you around that corner. Torres, Michaels, and someone I didn't recognize. They've got a shank made from the machine shop, probably 8 inches long, sharpened to a point that could punch through your vest like it's paper. They were going to jump you the second you turned that corner, and they were going to make it look like I did it." Rebecca's mind spun. This could be a setup, a distraction while someone else did something worse. But something in Marcus's expression, the genuine fear she saw there, the way his whole body was tensed like he expected her to spray him any second, made her hesitate. She'd been trained to read people, to spot lies and manipulation. This didn't feel like manipulation. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her hand still on the pepper spray, but her finger easing slightly off the trigger. "Because in about 10 seconds, you're going to hear them wondering where you are," Marcus said, his words coming fast now. "And because I've got a daughter on the outside who I'm trying to get back to, Jasmine. She's 12 years old, and she writes me letters every week telling me about school and her friends and how she can't wait for me to come home. Attacking a guard would end any chance I have of early parole. It would mean I'd never see her grow up, never walk her down the aisle, never meet my grandkids. I'm not throwing that away unless it's to save a life." As if on cue, a voice drifted from around the corner, harsh and impatient. "Where is she? She should have been here by now. You think she changed her route?" Rebecca's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. Inmate Torres, serving life for murder, a man with nothing to lose and everything to gain from chaos. "BT, before we discover what Marcus truly saw and why these men wanted Officer Martinez dead, we'd love to know where our listeners are from around the world. Drop a comment telling us your location, and if this story moves you, leave a like to help us share more stories of redemption and humanity." Now back to Marcus and Rebecca's story. Marcus pulled Rebecca deeper into the shadows, his grip on her arm firm but not painful. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched so tight. She could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. This wasn't a man planning violence. This was a man terrified of what was about to happen, a man who'd just thrown away years of good behavior on the hope that she'd believe him. "How did you know?" she whispered, her training warring with her instincts. Everything she'd been taught said to call for backup, to never trust an inmate, to follow protocol no matter what. But protocol didn't account for situations like this. "I was in the library this afternoon, reshelving books in the back section," Marcus explained, his voice barely audible. "The ventilation system in this place is ancient, and sound travels through the ducts like you wouldn't believe. I heard them planning it, heard every word. They think you saw something last week, something you shouldn't have seen, something that's worth killing you over and framing me for it." Rebecca's mind raced back through the previous days, trying to remember anything unusual, anything that might have put a target on her back. Nothing stood out, just routine patrols, standard procedures, the same boring repetition that made up 90% of this job, unless... The memory hit her like a physical blow, so sudden and clear that she actually gasped. Last Thursday night, she'd been working a double shift, covering for Johnson, who'd called in sick. She'd walked past the administrative offices around 11 p.m., heading to the break room for coffee. The lights had been off in most offices, but the warden's door had been slightly ajar, and she'd seen someone inside. A man in an expensive suit. Not a uniform, civilian clothes. He'd been standing with his back to the door, talking on a cell phone, which was strange because cell phones weren't allowed in the facility except for specific authorized personnel. She'd paused, wondering if she should check it out, but then the man had turned slightly and she'd seen his profile. Distinguished looking, maybe 50 years old, with silver hair and the kind of face that belonged in a boardroom, not a prison. She'd assumed he was some kind of contractor or visiting official, someone with clearance she didn't know about. She'd moved on, gotten her coffee, finished her shift and forgotten about it, until now. The man in the suit, Rebecca breathed, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Last Thursday night, I saw him in the warden's office. Marcus nodded grimly, his expression confirming her worst fears. They think you can identify him, and apparently that's worth killing for. I don't know who he is or what he was doing here, but I know Torres and his crew are scared of him, really scared. The kind of scared that makes men do desperate things. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by low voices. Rebecca had seconds to make a decision that would change everything. Trust a convicted felon, a man who'd robbed people at gunpoint, who'd made choices that destroyed lives, or follow protocol and potentially walk into her own murder. The training said one thing. Her instincts said another. She looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected to find in a place like this: genuine humanity. Not the calculated manipulation of a con artist, not the dead-eyed stare of a sociopath, but real, honest concern for another human being. It was the same look she'd seen in her father's eyes when he'd pulled her back from running into traffic as a child. The look of someone who'd act without thinking to save a life. "What do we do?" she asked, and in that moment she crossed a line she could never uncross. Marcus's expression shifted from fear to determination, and she saw a glimpse of who he must have been before prison, before the bad choices and worse consequences. "There's a maintenance corridor behind us, about 20 feet back, leads to the east wing. We can get you to the control room, but we have to move now." "Right now?" Rebecca's training made one last desperate attempt to reassert itself. "You're asking me to let you out of your designated area. That's a violation of about 15 different regulations. I could lose my job just for not restraining you right now." "That's the only way you survive the next 5 minutes," Marcus interrupted, his voice urgent but not aggressive. "They've got the cameras in this section looped. I heard them talking about it. They've got someone on the inside, someone with access to the security systems. Nobody's watching right now. Nobody's coming to help. It's just you and me, Officer Martinez." The voices around the corner grew agitated, more urgent. "Something's wrong. She should have been here by now. Go check the other corridor. You two spread out. She can't have gone far." Rebecca made her choice. Later, she'd wonder if it was the right one, if she'd been manipulated or if her instincts had truly saved her life. But in that moment, with danger closing in from all sides and a convicted felon offering her a way out, she chose to trust. "Show me," she said. They moved quickly through the shadows, Marcus leading the way with surprising knowledge of the prison's layout. Rebecca kept her hand on her radio, ready to call for backup the moment they reached a safe zone, assuming there was such a thing anymore. If the cameras were compromised, if someone on the inside was helping Torres, then nowhere in this facility was truly safe. "How do you know about the maintenance corridors?" she asked, as they slipped through a narrow doorway she'd never noticed before, hidden behind a utility panel. "I used to work construction before." Marcus trailed off, his voice heavy with regret. "Before I made the worst decision of my life, before I decided that robbing a convenience store was a better option than asking for help. These old prisons, they all have the same basic structure, built in the 70s, right? Concrete and steel, designed more for cost efficiency than security. There are gaps everywhere if you know where to look." 68, Rebecca confirmed, her respect for this man growing despite herself, despite everything she'd been taught about maintaining professional distance from inmates. "The facility opened in 1968. How did you know that?" "I read," Marcus said simply. "Library's got a whole section on Texas prison history. When you've got 15 years to kill, you read everything." They emerged into a dimly lit corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits, the air thick with the smell of oil and old concrete. The sound of their pursuers faded behind them, but Rebecca knew they weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus said, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret mixed with fear. "Something that's going to make this situation a whole lot worse." Rebecca stopped, studying Marcus's face in the dim light. "What?" The man you saw last Thursday, the one in the suit." Marcus took a deep breath, and Rebecca could see him wrestling with something, some decision about how much to tell her. "I know who he is, and if I'm right about why he was here, this goes way deeper than just you seeing his face. This goes all the way to the top." "Who is he?" Rebecca demanded, her hand instinctively moving to her radio again. "His name is Richard Caldwell. He's a lawyer, but not the kind that helps people like me. He's the kind that makes problems disappear for people with money and power. The kind that shows up when someone important needs something done quietly." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, his whole body radiating tension. 3 weeks ago, another inmate died in his cell, Peterson. They said it was a heart attack, natural causes, 52 years old, overweight, high blood pressure. The medical examiner signed off on it, and everyone moved on. Rebecca remembered. Inmate Peterson, found dead during morning count, his body already cold. The ME had done a quick examination, ruled it natural causes, and the body had been shipped to the county morgue within hours. Unusually fast, now that she thought about it. Usually there was more paperwork, more investigation, especially with a death in custody. "You think it wasn't natural," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I know it wasn't," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. "Peterson was my cellmate for 6 months before they moved him. He told me things he probably shouldn't have. He was going to testify in a federal case, something about corruption, money laundering, connections between prison officials and organized crime. He had evidence, documents he'd smuggled out through his lawyer. He told me about it 2 days before he died. Said he was scared, said people on the outside wanted him quiet, but he was going to do the right thing anyway. He was going to testify." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that made Rebecca's stomach turn. "And you think Caldwell was here to arrange it, to arrange Peterson's death?" "I think Caldwell was here to make sure it stayed quiet, to make sure nobody asked questions, nobody looked too closely." Marcus met her eyes, and she saw genuine fear there. "And now, you're a loose end. Someone who can place him at the scene, just like I'm about to be." The sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridor behind them, closer now. Their pursuers had found their trail, and they were moving fast. "Move!" Rebecca grabbed Marcus's arm, and they ran deeper into the maintenance corridor, their footsteps echoing off the metal pipes. Her mind was racing faster than her feet. If what Marcus said was true, this wasn't just about her safety. This was about corruption that reached beyond these walls, into places that were supposed to be untouchable. The warden's office, the medical examiner, maybe even higher. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met, each one disappearing into darkness. Marcus hesitated, his eyes scanning the options, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his expression. "Which way?" Rebecca demanded, her breath coming hard now. "I'm not sure. This part I don't know as well." For the first time, fear cracked through Marcus's calm exterior. "If we choose wrong, we could end up trapped, dead end with nowhere to run, and then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The footsteps behind them grew louder, accompanied now by voices, angry voices, desperate voices. Men who knew that if they failed, if they let Rebecca Martinez reach safety and tell her story, they'd face consequences worse than anything the prison system could officially dish out. Rebecca pulled out her radio, her finger on the call button, ready to request immediate backup. But before she could press it, Marcus's hand covered hers, stopping her. "Wait. Think about it. If there's corruption in the administration, if someone high up is involved in this, you don't know who you can trust. Call the wrong person, send your location to the wrong ears, and we're both dead. They'll make it look like I took you hostage, like I attacked you and you had to defend yourself. Or worse, they'll make us both disappear and claim you went missing during your rounds." He was right, and that terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. In a place where she was supposed to represent law and order, where she wore a badge and carried the authority of the state, she couldn't trust the very system she served. She was alone in the dark with a convicted felon, running for her life from other inmates and possibly from the people who were supposed to be on her side. "Then what do we do?" she asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Marcus's expression changed. She saw something shift in his eyes, a resolve that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, from whatever part of him had decided to save her life in the first place. "There's one person who might help. Someone who's been here long enough to see through the corruption, someone who's got her own reasons to want the truth to come out, but you're not going to like it." "Who?" Rebecca asked, though part of her already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. Nothing about this night was simple anymore. "Warden's secretary, Mrs. Chen. She's been here 30 years, seen 4 wardens come and go, watched this place change from what it was supposed to be into what it is now. If anyone knows what's really happening in this place, what's really going on behind closed doors, it's her." Marcus glanced back toward the pursuing footsteps, calculating distances and time. "And she owes me a favor. A big one." "A favor? How does an inmate—" Rebecca started, but Marcus cut her off. "Her grandson got mixed up with the wrong people last year. Gang stuff, drugs, the kind of situation that ends with a kid dead or in prison himself. She was desperate, didn't know what to do. The system couldn't help her, or wouldn't. So she came to me." Marcus's voice was steady, but Rebecca could hear the weight of his past in every word. "I still have connections on the outside, people I used to run with, people who owe me from before I got locked up. I sent word to some of them, asked them to help the kid get out of that situation. They did. He's clean now, going to community college, staying away from the life. Mrs. Chen knows I saved her grandson's future, maybe his life." Rebecca stared at him, trying to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about how prisons worked, about the clear lines between inmates and staff. "You're telling me the warden's secretary is indebted to you? That's the reality of this place," Marcus interrupted. "The official rules and the real rules are 2 different things. I'm not proud of the connections I have, Officer Martinez. I'm not proud of the life I lived before I came here, but sometimes the worst parts of our past can save lives in the present. Sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't." The footsteps were close now, maybe 30 seconds behind them. Rebecca had to choose. Trust this convicted felon completely. Put her life in the hands of a man who'd admitted to having criminal connections, or try to fight their way out alone against 3 armed men in the dark. "Her office is in the administrative wing," Rebecca said, making her decision. "That's 3 corridors and 2 security checkpoints away. We'd have to cross the main yard or go through the cell blocks. Either way, we'll be exposed. I know a way, but it means going through the old solitary confinement block, the one they closed down 5 years ago." Marcus's expression was grim. "It's not safe, structurally or otherwise, but it's our best shot." Rebecca had heard stories about that place. Structural issues, they said officially. Unsafe conditions, crumbling concrete, exposed rebar. But she'd also heard whispers of other things, darker things that happened there before it was shut down. Inmates who went in and came out different, or didn't come out at all. Guards who refused to work that section. Incidents that never made it into official reports. "Lead the way," she said, because what choice did she have? Marcus nodded and turned down the left corridor, moving fast but careful, checking corners before they rounded them. As they ran, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line she could never uncross. She was trusting a convicted felon with her life, following him deeper into the bowels of the prison, away from help and safety and everything her training had taught her. But staying alive seemed more important than protocol right now. Staying alive seemed like the only thing that mattered. They reached a heavy metal door marked with faded warning signs. Condemned. No entry. Structural hazard. Marcus pulled a piece of wire from his pocket and worked it into the lock with practiced ease. "Where did you learn to do that?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "Same place I learned everything else that got me in here," Marcus said. The lock clicked open. Some skills you never forget, no matter how much you wish you could. He pulled the door open, and the smell hit them immediately. Mold, decay, and something else. Something that made Rebecca's skin crawl. The smell of a place where bad things had happened and the walls remembered. "Stay close," Marcus said. "And whatever you do, don't touch the walls. Some of the concrete is unstable." They stepped into the darkness of the old solitary block, and Rebecca felt like she was stepping into another world entirely. The old solitary block smelled of mold and abandonment, but underneath that was something worse, the scent of human suffering, of despair so deep it had soaked into the concrete itself. Their footsteps echoed off walls that hadn't seen maintenance in years, creating strange acoustic effects that made it sound like they were being followed by ghosts. Rebecca's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing cell after empty cell, each one a tiny concrete box barely large enough for a man to lie down in. Graffiti covered the walls, messages from inmates long since released or dead. Some of it was the usual prison fare, crude drawings and profanity, but some of it was different. Desperate messages scratched into concrete with fingernails or makeshift tools. "God forgive me. I can't take another day. Tell my family I'm sorry." Rebecca felt sick reading them, imagining the men who'd been locked in these boxes, alone with their thoughts and their regrets. "How much further?" she whispered, her voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. "Just through here. There's a door at the end that leads to the administrative basement. Mrs. Chen sometimes uses it to avoid the main corridors when she's working late. She showed it to me once, when I was helping move some old files from storage." Marcus moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. "The floor's not stable everywhere. Stay in my footsteps exactly." They were halfway through the block when Marcus suddenly stopped. His hand shot out, stopping Rebecca in her tracks with such force that she nearly stumbled. "What?" she started, but he held up a hand for silence. "Listen." Rebecca held her breath, straining to hear whatever had alarmed him. At first, she heard nothing but the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the hum of old pipes. Then she caught it. Voices, coming from ahead of them, not behind. Multiple voices, low and urgent. They circled around. Marcus breathed, his voice barely audible. They knew we'd come this way. They knew about the old solitary block. They were trapped. Pursuers behind them, ambush ahead. Rebecca's hand moved to her pepper spray, knowing it wouldn't be enough against 3 men with weapons and nothing to lose. Her radio was useless if she couldn't trust who might answer. Her training had prepared her for a lot of situations, but not this, never this. "There's one more option," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the impossible situation. "But you're really not going to like it." Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, Marcus pulled open the door to one of the solitary cells. The hinges screamed in protest, the sound echoing through the block like a siren. He gestured inside urgently. "We hide. Wait them out. It's the last thing they'll expect. They think we're running, trying to get to safety. They won't think to check the cells." Rebecca looked into the darkness of that cell, a space designed to break human spirits. A concrete box that had held God knows how many men in isolation and despair. Every instinct screamed at her not to go in there, not to trap herself in a space with no escape route. But the voices ahead were getting closer, and the footsteps behind them were closing in. She stepped inside, and Marcus followed, pulling the door closed behind them with agonizing slowness to minimize the sound. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Marcus's breathing inches away from her. The cell was maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a concrete slab for a bed and nothing else. No toilet, no sink, no window. Just concrete and darkness, and the weight of all the suffering that had happened in this tiny space. They stood pressed against the wall beside the door, barely breathing, as footsteps approached outside. Rebecca could feel Marcus's tension, could sense him coiled like a spring, ready to fight if they were discovered. Her hand was on her pepper spray, though she knew it would be useless in this confined space. If the door opened, if they were found, it would be over in seconds. The footsteps stopped right outside their cell. Rebecca's heart hammered so hard she was sure it could be heard through the door. A voice spoke, harsh and impatient. "Torres, check the cells. All of them. They're in here somewhere." In the absolute darkness, pressed against the cold concrete, Rebecca heard Marcus whisper so quietly she almost missed it. "There's something else I need to tell you, about why they really want you dead. And it's worse than you think." The sound of cell doors being yanked open echoed through the old solitary block, each metallic screech making Rebecca's heart jump. She could hear Torres and his men working their way down the corridor, methodically checking every cell. They were 3 cells away, then 2. The footsteps grew closer, and Rebecca could hear their breathing, could smell the sweat and desperation coming off them. Marcus's hand found hers in the darkness, and she felt him squeeze once. A silent message. "Be ready." She squeezed back, acknowledging. Her other hand gripped the pepper spray so tightly her fingers ached. If that door opened, she'd have maybe 2 seconds to act before they were overwhelmed. 1 cell away now. She could hear Torres's voice clearly. "Nothing in this one. Check the next." The footsteps stopped directly outside their door. Rebecca held her breath. Every muscle in her body tensed. She could see a thin line of light under the door, could see shadows moving. A hand grabbed the door handle, and she prepared to spray, to fight, to do whatever it took to survive. Then a radio crackled. "Torres, we got a problem. Guard coming through the east checkpoint. You need to clear out now." Torres cursed viciously. "We're not done here. She's in this block somewhere, I know it." "Now, Torres, unless you want to explain to the warden why you're in a condemned section after lockdown." More cursing. Then the footsteps retreated, moving fast. Rebecca and Marcus stayed frozen for a full minute after the sounds faded, neither daring to move or speak. Finally, Marcus whispered, "We need to move. They'll be back as soon as that guard clears the area." They slipped out of the cell, and Rebecca's legs nearly gave out. The adrenaline crash hit her hard, making her hands shake. But there was no time to recover. Marcus led her to the far end of the block, to a door she'd never have noticed in the darkness. He worked the lock again, and they emerged into a narrow stairwell that smelled of cleaning supplies and old paper. "Administrative basement," Marcus said. "Mrs. Chen's office is 2 floors up, but there's something I need to tell you first. About what Peterson told me before he died. About what's really going on in this place." Rebecca leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "Tell me." Marcus's expression in the dim stairwell light was haunted, like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. Peterson wasn't just going to testify about corruption. He was going to testify about murder. Multiple murders. Inmates who died in custody over the past 5 years, all ruled natural causes or accidents. But Peterson had proof they were arranged. Paid hits made to look like heart attacks, suicides, accidents in the workshop. Rebecca felt her blood run cold. How many? 7 that he knew about for certain. Maybe more. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. He had names, dates, methods. He'd been collecting evidence for 2 years, hiding it, waiting for the right moment. He was going to bring down everyone involved, from the guards who looked the other way, to the administrators who signed off on the death certificates, to the people on the outside who paid for it. "Why?" Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because some people are worth more dead than alive, witnesses who might testify, inmates who knew too much about operations on the outside, people who'd made enemies with long reaches and deep pockets. Marcus met her eyes. And because this prison has become a business, Officer Martinez, not a place for rehabilitation or justice, a business, and in business you eliminate problems. Rebecca's mind reeled. She'd heard rumors, of course. Every prison had rumors about corruption, about guards on the take, about inmates who ran operations from inside. But this was different. This was systematic. This was murder for profit. The man you saw, Richard Caldwell, he's the fixer, the one who arranges things, who makes sure the right people get paid, who ensures that investigations go nowhere. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Peterson told me Caldwell visited him 3 days before he died, came to his cell, told him it wasn't too late to change his mind about testifying, offered him money, offered to arrange early parole, offered everything. When Peterson refused, Caldwell just smiled and said, "I hope you've made peace with your choices." 2 days later, Peterson was dead. "And you think I saw Caldwell here to arrange another hit," Rebecca said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "I think you saw him here to clean up loose ends, to make sure nobody asks questions about Peterson's death. And now you're a loose end too." Marcus's voice was heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner, should have found a way to warn you. But I didn't know how, didn't know who to trust, and now we're both targets." Rebecca's training warred with the reality of what she was hearing. Everything Marcus said sounded insane, like a conspiracy theory spun by a paranoid inmate with too much time on his hands. But the evidence was there. The man in the suit, the ambush waiting for her. The corrupted security cameras, Torres and his crew willing to commit murder in a prison full of witnesses. "We need to get to Mrs. Chen," she said, pushing off the wall. "If what you're saying is true, we need to get this information to someone who can do something about it. Federal authorities, FBI, someone outside the prison system." "That's the problem," Marcus said as they started climbing the stairs. "Peterson tried that. He contacted the FBI 6 months ago, gave them everything he had. They started an investigation, sent agents to interview him. Then suddenly the investigation stalled. No more visits, no more calls. Peterson thought someone inside the FBI was compromised, or someone high enough up had made the investigation go away." "That's not possible," Rebecca protested. But even as she said it, she knew it was naive. She'd been a corrections officer long enough to know that corruption could reach anywhere, that enough money and power could make almost anything disappear. They reached the second-floor landing. Marcus held up a hand, listening. The administrative wing was quiet, most offices dark. It was after 10 p.m., well past normal business hours. But a light showed under one door at the end of the hallway. "That's her office," Marcus whispered. "But we need to be careful. If someone's watching, if they know we're coming here." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They moved down the hallway, staying close to the wall, checking every shadow. Rebecca's hand was on her radio again, ready to call for help if this turned out to be another trap. But who would she call? Who could she trust? They reached Mrs. Chen's door. Marcus knocked softly, a specific pattern. 3 quick, 2 slow, 1 quick. A code. The door opened immediately, and a small Asian woman in her 60s stood there, her eyes widening as she saw them. "Marcus, what are you doing here? And Officer Martinez?" Her gaze moved between them, reading the situation with the quick intelligence of someone who'd survived 3 decades in the prison system. "Come in, quickly." "Mrs." Chen locked the door behind them and pulled the blinds closed in one smooth motion. Her office was small but organized, walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves full of binders. A computer sat on her desk, screensaver showing pictures of what Rebecca assumed was her family. The woman moved to her desk and pulled out a bottle of water, handing it to Rebecca. "Sit, both of you, and tell me what's happened." Her voice was calm, but Rebecca could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the door. Marcus explained quickly, efficiently, leaving out nothing. The ambush, The chase, what Peterson had told him. The man in the suit. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a flash drive. I was hoping I wouldn't need to use this, hoping that someone else would come forward, that the investigation would move forward on its own, but I should have known better. "What is that?" Rebecca asked. "Insurance," Mrs. Chen said simply. "I've been here 30 years, Officer Martinez. I've seen 4 wardens come and go. I've watched this place change from what it was supposed to be into something else entirely. And I've been keeping records, copying files, documenting things that didn't add up, deaths that seemed suspicious, transfers that happened too quickly, money that moved through accounts it shouldn't have touched." She held up the flash drive. "This is everything I've collected over the past 5 years. Financial records, medical reports, incident logs, security footage that was supposed to be deleted but I saved. It's not complete, and I'm not sure it's enough to prove anything in court, but it's a start." Marcus stared at her. "You've been investigating this? All this time?" "Someone had to, Mrs. Chen said quietly. "After my grandson, after what you did to help him, I realized that the system isn't going to fix itself. Good people have to stand up even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous." She looked at Rebecca. "Peterson came to me 2 weeks before he died. He knew I was collecting information. He wanted to add his evidence to mine, wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, the truth would still come out." "Do you have his evidence?" Rebecca asked urgently. Mrs. Chen's expression fell. "No. He was going to bring it to me, but he died before he could. I think it's still hidden somewhere in his cell or in his personal effects, but I don't have access to those areas." "I'll see." Rebecca's mind raced. His personal effects would be in the property room. Everything inmates have when they die gets catalogued and stored there until it can be released to family or disposed of. If Peterson hid evidence in something that looked innocuous, it might still be there. "The property room is in the basement, near the old intake area," Mrs. Chen said. "But it's locked, and only senior staff have access. You'd need authorization, and given what's happening tonight, I don't think we can risk going through official channels." Marcus stood up, pacing the small office. "I can get us in. The lock on that room is old, same type as half the doors in this place. Give me 2 minutes and a paperclip, and I'll have it open." "That's breaking and entering," Rebecca said automatically, then almost laughed at the absurdity. She was already so far past protocol that one more violation hardly mattered. "But if we get caught, if someone sees us, then we're no worse off than we are now," Marcus said. "They already want us dead. At least this way, we might get evidence that can bring them down." Mrs. Chen pulled out a key ring from her desk. "Take these. They'll get you through the administrative corridors to the basement without triggering alarms. But you need to be fast. The night shift supervisor does rounds every hour, and the next one is in 20 minutes. Rebecca took the keys, feeling their weight in her hand. This was it, the point of no return. She could still call for backup, could still try to handle this through official channels. But Marcus was right. If the corruption went as high as they suspected, official channels might just get them killed. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Chen said, her voice heavy. "If you're going after this evidence, if you're planning to expose what's happening here, you need to know what you're up against. The people involved in this aren't just corrupt guards or administrators. They have connections outside these walls. Political connections, law enforcement connections, people who can make investigations disappear and witnesses along with them." "Then why are you helping us?" Rebecca asked. "Why risk everything?" Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. "Because my grandson is alive and free because of Marcus. Because I've watched good people die in this place while bad people profit. And because someone has to stand up. Someone always has to stand up, even when it's terrifying." They left Mrs. Chen's office and made their way through the administrative corridors, using her keys to bypass locked doors. The building was quiet, almost eerily so. Their footsteps echoed off tile floors, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Rebecca kept her hand on her pepper spray, her eyes scanning constantly for danger. Marcus moved with surprising confidence, leading them through turns and down stairwells like he'd memorized the layout. Maybe he had? Rebecca was learning that Marcus Webb was full of surprises, that the file she'd read about him barely scratched the surface of who he really was. They reached the basement level, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The air was damp, smelling of concrete and old paper. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting unstable shadows. The property room was at the end of a long corridor behind a heavy metal door with a window of reinforced glass. Marcus pulled out a paperclip he'd taken from Mrs. Chen's desk and straightened it, then bent it into a specific shape. He worked the lock with practiced ease, his fingers moving with the muscle memory of skills learned long ago. The lock clicked open in less than a minute. "Where did you learn to do that?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "Same place I learned everything else that ruined my life," Marcus said quietly. "I was good at this stuff, Officer Martinez. Really good. Could open any lock, bypass any security system, get into places I had no business being. I thought I was smart, thought I was untouchable. Right up until the moment I got caught with a gun in my hand and a terrified clerk staring at me." He pushed the door open, and they stepped into the property room. Rows of metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each one packed with boxes and bags. Personal effects from thousands of inmates, organized by date and inmate number. "Peterson was 8223156, Marcus said. "His effects should be in the section for inmates who died this year." They found the section and started searching. Box after box of sad remnants of lives lived and lost. Letters from family, photographs, cheap jewelry, books with worn covers. The detritus of human existence, reduced to cardboard boxes on metal shelves. Rebecca found Peterson's box on the third shelf. It was smaller than most, containing only a few items. A Bible with a worn cover, a photograph of a woman and 2 children, a notebook with a blue cover, and a small transistor radio, the kind inmates could buy from the commissary. Marcus picked up the radio, turning it over in his hands. "This is it. Has to be. Peterson loved this thing, listened to it every night. But look," he pointed to the battery compartment. "The screws are different. These are Phillips head, but the radio came with flathead screws. Someone replaced them." He used the paperclip to unscrew the battery compartment. Inside, where the batteries should have been, was a small USB drive wrapped in plastic. "Got it," Marcus breathed, pulling out the drive carefully. "This is what Peterson died for. This is what they killed him to keep hidden." Rebecca took the drive, feeling its weight in her palm. Such a small thing to be worth multiple lives. "We need to get this to someone who can use it. Someone outside the prison system, someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Mrs. Chen might know someone," Marcus said. "A journalist, maybe, or a federal prosecutor who's clean. Someone who—" The lights went out. Complete darkness engulfed them, so sudden and absolute that Rebecca gasped. Then emergency lighting kicked in, dim red bulbs that cast everything in a hellish glow. "That's not a power failure," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "That's someone cutting the power deliberately. They know we're here." As if to confirm his words, they heard footsteps in the corridor outside, multiple sets of footsteps moving with purpose, and then a voice, amplified by a radio, echoing through the basement. "Officer Martinez, Marcus Webb, we know you're in the property room. There's no way out. Come out now, and we can resolve this peacefully." "Make us come in there, and things will get messy." Rebecca recognized the voice. It wasn't Torres. It was someone worse. Deputy Warden Carlson, second in command of the entire facility. The corruption went higher than she'd imagined. Marcus grabbed her arm. "There's a ventilation shaft in the back corner, big enough to crawl through. It leads to the old boiler room. We can get out that way." "How do you know that?" Rebecca asked. But she was already moving toward the back of the room. "Because I've been planning my escape route since the day I got here," Marcus admitted. Never thought I'd actually use it. Never thought I'd be saving a guard instead of running from one. They reached the ventilation shaft. Marcus pulled off the grate, and Rebecca looked into the narrow tunnel beyond. It was barely 2 feet square, dark and claustrophobic, but it was their only chance. Rebecca crawled into the ventilation shaft first, Marcus right behind her. The metal was cold against her hands and knees, and the space was so tight she could barely move. Claustrophobia clawed at her throat, but she forced herself forward, inch by inch. Behind them, she heard the property room door crash open, heard angry voices, and the sound of boxes being thrown aside. "They're not here! Check the corridors!" "No, wait! Look at this! The ventilation grate is off. They went into the shaft system." "Then go after them! Move!" Rebecca crawled faster, her breath coming in short gasps. The shaft seemed to go on forever, turning corners, branching off in different directions. Marcus guided her from behind, his voice calm despite the situation. "Left here, then straight for about 20 feet. There's a drop down to the boiler room level. It's about 6 feet, but there's a pipe you can use to climb down." They reached the drop, and Rebecca looked down into darkness. She could hear water dripping, could smell oil and rust. No choice. She lowered herself through the opening, found the pipe Marcus had mentioned, and climbed down. Her feet hit solid ground, and she moved aside to let Marcus follow. They were in the old boiler room, a cavernous space filled with ancient machinery and pipes. The emergency lighting barely penetrated here, leaving most of the room in shadow, but Rebecca could see a door on the far side, and beyond it, a stairwell that might lead to freedom. "We need to get back to Mrs. Chen," Marcus said. "Give her the drive. Let her get it to someone who can use it. Then you need to get out of this prison. Call the real authorities, people from outside who aren't compromised." "What about you?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm not leaving," Marcus said simply. "I run now. I'm a fugitive for the rest of my life. I never see my daughter again, never get the chance to make things right. But if I stay, if I face this, maybe I can help bring these people down. Maybe I can finally do something good with the skills I learned doing bad things." Rebecca wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that staying was suicide. But she could see the determination in his eyes, could see that he'd already made his choice. This was his redemption, his chance to be the man he wanted his daughter to see. "Then we do this together," she said. "We get the evidence to Mrs. Chen, and then we make sure everyone knows what's happening here. No more hiding, no more running. We end this tonight." Dikesu said they made their way through the boiler room, moving carefully around machinery and avoiding puddles of oil and water. The door to the stairwell was locked, but Marcus had it open in seconds. They climbed quickly, emerging on the ground floor of the administrative wing. The building was no longer quiet. They could hear voices, footsteps, radios crackling. The entire night shift had been mobilized, searching for them. Rebecca and Marcus moved through the corridors like ghosts, using every shadow, every alcove, staying one step ahead of their pursuers. They were almost back to Mrs. Chen's office when they rounded a corner and came face to face with Deputy Warden Carlson. He stood in the middle of the corridor, flanked by 2 guards Rebecca didn't recognize, not regular prison guards. These men wore tactical gear, carried weapons that weren't standard issue. Private security, maybe, or something worse. Carlson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Officer Martinez, Mr. Webb, I'm disappointed. I thought we could handle this quietly, but you've made that impossible." Rebecca's hand moved to her pepper spray, but one of the guards raised his weapon. Not a gun, she realized. A taser, non-lethal, but effective. And it wouldn't leave the kind of evidence a gunshot would. "The USB drive," Carlson said, holding out his hand. "Give it to me, and we can all walk away from this." "You can go back to your rounds, Officer Martinez. Webb can go back to his cell. No one needs to get hurt." "You mean no one else needs to die?" Rebecca said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "Like Peterson died. Like the 7 other inmates you had killed." Carlson's smile faded. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. This is bigger than you, bigger than this prison. The people I work for, they have reach you can't imagine. You give me that drive, and maybe they'll let you live. Maybe they'll decide you're not worth the trouble of eliminating. Or maybe, a new voice said from behind Carlson, you're the one who doesn't understand what you're interfering with. Mrs. Chen stepped out of her office, and she wasn't alone. Behind her were 3 people in suits, badges visible on their belts. Federal agents, real ones, Rebecca hoped, not more corrupt officials. Deputy Warden Carlson, one of the agents said, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, and about 15 other charges we'll add as we go. You have the right to remain silent. Carlson's face went white, then red with rage. He lunged toward Mrs. Chen, but the guards beside him didn't move to help. They were already putting their weapons down, hands raised in surrender. Smart men who knew when the game was over. The next hours passed in a blur. More federal agents arrived, along with state police and investigators from the Department of Justice. The prison went into lockdown, inmates confined to cells, while officials swept through every department, seizing records and arresting staff. Rebecca gave her statement 3 times, each time to a different investigator, each time adding more details as her memory cleared and the adrenaline faded. Marcus was taken into custody, but not arrested. Protective custody, they called it. A witness who needed to be kept safe until he could testify. Rebecca watched them lead him away, and he turned back to look at her one last time. "Thank you," she mouthed. He nodded, a small smile on his face. "Tell Jasmine I'm proud of her," he called out. "Tell her I'm finally doing the right thing, Mrs." Chen sat in her office, surrounded by investigators, walking them through years of evidence she'd collected. The flash drive Peterson had hidden contained financial records that traced money from organized crime figures through shell companies to prison officials. Payments for arranged deaths, for smuggling operations, for turning the prison into a criminal enterprise. Combined with Mrs. Chen's documentation, it was enough to bring down not just Carlson, but a network that reached into state government and beyond. As dawn broke over Huntsville State Prison, Rebecca stood outside in the parking lot, watching the sun rise. She was exhausted, traumatized, and would probably need therapy for years to process what had happened. But she was alive, and the truth was finally coming out. An investigator approached her, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. "Officer Martinez, I'm Special Agent Williams, FBI. I wanted to thank you personally for your courage tonight. What you and Mr. Webb did, the risks you took, you saved lives. Not just your own, but future victims who would have died if this corruption had continued." "I just did what I had to do," Rebecca said quietly. "That's what heroes always say," Williams replied. "We're going to need you to testify, probably multiple times. This case is going to be big, national news. Are you prepared for that?" Rebecca thought about it, thought about the media attention, the scrutiny, the way her life would change. Then she thought about Peterson, about the 7 other inmates who died, about all the future victims who wouldn't die now because the truth was out. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." 3 months later, Rebecca stood outside Huntsville State Prison for the last time. She'd resigned from the corrections department, unable to continue working in a system she'd seen corrupted from the inside. But she hadn't given up on justice. She'd enrolled in law school, determined to fight corruption from a different angle, to be the kind of lawyer who protected people instead of preying on them. The trials were ongoing. Carlson had been convicted on multiple counts and was facing life in prison. Ironically, he'd been sent to the same facility where he'd once been deputy warden, though in a very different capacity. Dozens of other officials had been arrested, and the investigation had expanded to other prisons in the state. The scandal had reached all the way to the governor's office, forcing resignations and reforms. Richard Caldwell, the lawyer who'd arranged it all, had fled the country. But Interpol had issued a warrant, and it was only a matter of time before he was caught. The people he'd worked for, the organized crime figures who'd paid for the murders, were being rounded up one by one. And Marcus Webb had been granted early parole. His cooperation with the investigation, combined with his heroic actions that night, had convinced the parole board that he'd genuinely reformed. He'd been released 2 weeks ago, and Rebecca had been there to see him walk out of the prison gates. She'd met his daughter, Jasmine, a bright 12-year-old who'd thrown herself into her father's arms and refused to let go for a full 5 minutes. Marcus had cried, unashamed, holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. "Thank you," he'd said to Rebecca, his voice thick with emotion, "for trusting me, for giving me the chance to prove I could be better." "You saved my life," Rebecca had replied. "I think we're even." Now, standing outside the prison one last time, Rebecca thought about that night, about the choice Marcus had made to save her instead of staying safe, about Mrs. Chen's quiet courage in collecting evidence for years, about Peterson, who died trying to do the right thing, but whose evidence had finally brought justice. She thought about how easy it would have been to follow protocol, to trust the system, to believe that corruption couldn't reach as high as it had, and how that would have gotten her killed. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Sometimes justice required courage more than it required procedure, and sometimes the people you least expected turned out to be heroes. Rebecca's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Jasmine's soccer game today. She scored 2 goals. Wish you could have been there. Thank you for giving me the chance to see this." She smiled, typing back, "Congratulations to her. You're a good father, Marcus. Don't forget that." Another text came through, this one from Mrs. Chen. "The reforms are being implemented. New oversight, new procedures, independent investigations for all inmate deaths. It's not perfect, but it's better. We did that. We made it better." Rebecca looked up at the prison one last time. It looked different now in the daylight, less menacing. Just a building, just concrete and steel. The evil hadn't been in the walls. It had been in the people who'd corrupted the system, who'd turned a place meant for rehabilitation into a place of murder and profit. But good people had stood up, had fought back, had risked everything to expose the truth, and in the end, good had won. Not easily, not without cost, but it had won. She got in her car and drove away, heading toward her new life. Law school started in 2 weeks. She had a lot to learn, a lot of work ahead of her, but she was ready. She'd faced the worst humanity had to offer and survived. She'd seen corruption at its deepest and helped tear it down, and she'd learned that redemption was possible, that people could change, could choose to be better, could find the courage to do the right thing even when it cost them everything. Marcus Webb had taught her that, a convicted felon who'd saved her life and helped bring down a criminal empire, a man who'd made terrible choices but had chosen in the end to be a hero. As she drove away from Huntsville State Prison, Rebecca thought about the last thing Marcus had said to her before he'd left with his daughter. "Tell people my story," he'd said, "not to make me look good, but to show that anyone can change, that it's never too late to do the right thing, that redemption is always possible if you're brave enough to reach for it." She would tell his story. She'd tell it in courtrooms and classrooms, in interviews and articles. She'd tell it to anyone who would listen, because it was a story worth telling, a story of courage and redemption, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, a story that proved that even in the darkest places, hope could survive. And sometimes hope was all you needed to change the world.